her initiative to invite Mr. Peled today here at the Swiss Press Club. We are not in a big company, but anyway, attention will come in the coming hours, the coming days, because you will speak at the university on next Wednesday, and I am sure the subject you are dealing with is very attractive, because you wrote this book, The General's Son, because you are the son of General Peled, a well-known general of the Israeli army, and you have also an original and interesting view about how to solve this long conflict. So thank you very much for your commitment, and we will be very interested to hear you. Before to give you the floor, I would ask you to sign our golden book. Yeah. Just there. And I give you a little souvenir from your coming at the press club, Mr. Peled.
Thank you very much.
Unfortunately, I have to leave before the end of the speech, but we are very pleased to have you. And I give you the floor. Just,
Okay. Well, thank you very much. It's an honor to be here. Thank you all, those of you that are here, for being here, and thank you for the introduction. I'll make some brief comments, and then after that, I'm happy to take questions. So my name is Miko Peled. I'm an Israeli activist. I wrote the book, The General's Son, Journey of an Israeli in Palestine. I'll be here speaking on Wednesday at the University of Geneva. Like the title suggests, like you heard, I'm the son of an Israeli general, Matti Peled, he was an officer in 1948 in the War of Independence, and then he was a general and a member of the Israeli Army High Command in the War of 1967. I'm also the grandson of one of the men who signed the Israeli Declaration of Independence, Dr. Avraham Katsnelson. So I have a very strong Zionist background, very strong patriotic Israeli background. An interesting note about my father: after the victory of 1967, he retired from the Israeli army, and he became an advocate for the rights of Palestinians, and he dedicated the rest of his life. He passed away in 1995. He dedicated the rest of his life to the cause of Israeli-Palestinian peace. Another aspect of my biography, which was relevant to this because it was what pushed me to become an activist, is in 1997, in September, my sister's little girl was killed in a suicide attack in Jerusalem. It was an attack that was ordered and executed by Hamas. And today my sister, she's the Dr. Nurit Peled El-Hanan. She's a founding member of the Russell Tribunal of Palestine and a harsh critic of the State of Israel. She also wrote a book about the Israeli education system. She's an educator. Now, to fast forward to today, I think it makes sense to talk a little bit about the so-called peace process that's been going on for 2 decades, actually, a little more than 2 decades, since the Oslo Accords were signed in September of 1993. And the sentiment that you hear more than anything about this is, of course, that it's hopeless, that they keep trying and they hit the wall. And I think it's only hopeless if you have expectations. And there's no reason to have any expectations from the peace process because it's not meant to bring about peace. The Oslo process and the peace process that's been going on since then, their objective has been to bring the Palestinians to surrender and to strengthen Israeli hold on the land, on its resources, and the people. And that's exactly what it did. So I think the peace process and the Oslo process have been very successful because peace was not their real objective, but strengthening Israel and strengthening the oppression against the Palestinians was their objective. If we have expectation that the peace process will lead to peace, then of course we are disappointed, but I think it's an unrealistic expectation to begin with. I think it's important to recognize that you have a peace process when you have 2 countries at war. Here we don't have 2 countries at war. We have 1 country. Israel and Palestine is 1 country. It has 2 names, but it's 1 country. There are 2 nations that live there, but there's 1 government and 1 army. And the army, of course, and the government are the Israelis. And their sole objective is the oppression of the Palestinian people. So what we need, if we really are serious about a solution to the conflict, is not a peace process. What we need is an anti-apartheid movement, an anti-apartheid or an anti-Zionist campaign. And the word apartheid and the word Zionism, I think, are interchangeable. Whereas in the 80s we talked about apartheid in South Africa, today we talk about Zionism in Palestine. These two terms, I think, are interchangeable. So that is what is required. And I think in this case, even in Europe, which is more advanced than the United States, there's a big gap between the grassroots movements, how people feel about this, and then what the mainstream media and the government actually do and talk about. Whereas the mainstream media and European governments still support the state of Israel, more and more people on the ground are realizing that the whole idea of Zionism is flawed and we need to move beyond it. Now, a few things that I think we should take into consideration regarding the reality on the ground, and I think particularly being here in a press a press club. If we talk about, for example, the reality in Gaza, for almost a decade, Israel has been holding the people in Gaza, almost 1.6, 1.7 million people, under a brutal and unjustifiable and inexcusable siege. 1.6 million people living without access to clean water or water that's fit for drinking, without access to nutrition, without access to medication, to basic medicine. The United Nations came out with a report in the summer of 2012. The EU heads of mission came out with a report recently in 2013 describing the humanitarian crisis and also making it very, very clear that Israel is to be held responsible because Israel is the occupying power. Yet, I don't know when was the last time that a newspaper here in Geneva reported about this, or anywhere in the West for that matter. People are realizing that Gaza is facing a dangerous and pressing humanitarian and economic situation. This is according to the report. Power outages for up to 16 hours a day, closure of sewage pumping operations, reduced access to clean water, really no access to clean water, no medical supplies, cessation, of course there's no business, no construction materials are allowed, and this is a reality that's being allowed to continue. And I think what's important is that if we bring it down to very simple things, imagine you have a child that has an ear infection and you have no access to antibiotics. I don't know when the last time anybody here had an ear infection, but can you imagine going for days and days and days, and it's a child, and you don't have basic antibiotics? Now, this is not in some remote place in Afghanistan. This is a 20-minute drive from Israeli medical centers to which these Palestinians in Gaza have no access, which of course makes it worse. You don't find Israelis with no access to medication or no access to clean water or nutrition. You only find Palestinians in this situation. And this, of course, makes it so much worse. And, of course, this is a 3-hour flight from here. And it is happening in a state that is a completely developed modern state. So there are no justifications. There cannot be any excuses to allow this to continue. Another reality, I think, that is often quite ignored. 2.5 weeks ago, several hundred Palestinian prisoners who are held in Israeli jails under indefinite, what is called administrative detention, began a hunger strike. A few days ago, more than 5,000 Palestinian prisoners joined them. The entire Palestinian prison population joined them in this hunger strike. Why Israel keeps thousands of Palestinians in prison? I don't know that anybody has the answer to that. According to Israeli sources, the vast majority of them are not violent, have not been charged with violence. The way Israel conducts its policies regarding the prisoners is in violation of international law. It's immoral, it's illegal, and again, these are political prisoners. I don't know when was the last time this was reported here in Geneva about the situation of the prisoners. Now, a recent comment that was made by the U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry that Israel may become an apartheid state, has brought the issue up to the forefront again. I don't think he made this statement by mistake. I think he's probably too seasoned of a diplomat to do that. But it brought the question back, and I think it's an important question. In Israel, you have people who are divided into three groups, and each group lives under different sets of laws. So people like myself, Israeli Jews, we live in a privileged society. We have no restrictions, no legal restrictions. Palestinians who are citizens of the State of Israel, what Israel likes to call Israeli Arabs, or Israel likes to call sometimes the non-Jews, they live under a whole legal system, dozens and dozens of civil laws that discriminate against them and differentiate them from the Jewish citizens of the state. Israeli police rarely deals with crime in these communities, which are Israeli citizens, except that certain law enforcement agencies, particularly the secret police, go in there to harass them. There are tens of thousands of Palestinian citizens of the State of Israel that live without water supply and electricity in what they call unrecognized towns. And all around them, you have Israeli towns that have electricity and water supply. So, I mean, the only reason for the fact that they have to live like this is because they are Palestinian. Excuse me. And then the third group are the Palestinians who live in the West Bank and Gaza, and they are subject to the violence and the mercy, I should say, of the Israeli military law. And Israeli military law has no mercy towards these people. So is Israel an apartheid state? If I am in the West Bank and I'm arrested, Israeli civilian police, so the state police will take me into custody and Israeli civil law is applied. If a Palestinian is arrested in the same place in the West Bank for the same offense, they will be at the mercy of the Israeli military law, which, like I said, has no mercy towards Palestinians. The Israeli military arrests children, they beat them, they torture them without access to lawyers or to their parents. They will keep people for indefinite periods of time. They commit torture and abuse, but are accountable to no one. And so, once again, as journalists, I would challenge to see, especially here in the city of Geneva, with the Human Rights Commission and so forth, everything that the Geneva stands for. When was the last time anybody reported on the legal discrimination of Palestinians under Israeli law? This is severely lacking, I think, in the mainstream media. The State of Israel is based on Zionist ideology, which is basically a racist, colonialist ideology, which is inevitably violent as well. In 1948, the State of Israel was established after 12 months of a campaign of terrorism, ethnic cleansing, at the end of which almost 80% of the country was conquered by the Zionist militia. Hundreds of towns and cities were destroyed, and close to 1 million Palestinians were forced into exile. This is how the State of Israel was established, and I think calling Israel a Jewish state is an insult to all Jewish people, particularly to the survivors of the Holocaust, most of whom, by the way, never went to Israel. The vast majority of Holocaust survivors never went to Israel. In 1967, when Israel conquered the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza, it continued the process of 1948, the ethnic cleansing, the terrorizing, expelling hundreds of thousands of Palestinians, destroying towns and villages, and colonizing the country by building for Israeli Jews only. Claiming that the Israeli government may one day allow for the creation of a Palestinian state between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea can only be a result of one of two things. It's either a lie or a complete misunderstanding of the situation. So how do we end this, and why am I as optimistic as I am? And I will tell you that I'm very optimistic. I think the only way forward, as I said earlier, in Palestine, Israel, is to recognize that Israel is today, like South Africa used to be, a racist apartheid state. And if we want to move beyond the conflict, we must support an all-out anti-Zionism, anti-apartheid campaign to bring about a true democracy with equal rights for Palestinians and Israelis. A one person, one vote, instead of the Zionist state that exists today, which gives exclusive rights to Jewish people. I think this will make life better and more secure for Israeli Jews and for Palestinians. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Miko Peled. Is there any question in the room? Mrs. Michel, I see.
Well, about the children that are in jails.
You have a microphone here.
Push.
Push the.
Thank you. And I was wondering about the children who are in Israeli jails because they have no help from anyone, and very often they are arrested and they are put in secret in a cell where they are alone, and sometimes they are in the dark. And I wonder what can be helped, what can be done on the spot, to put an end to that. Because it's just terrifying a whole generation of children, the ones who are arrested because maybe they had a stone in their hand, but how much damage can a stone make to a big tank or to a bulldozer or even to a jeep or anything? It's not a reason to say that. So how could we?
Well, I don't think any of the issues can be resolved independent of the whole thing. In a state that allows and condones a siege on Gaza, the cruel and brutal siege on Gaza, that allows its army to go and bomb Gaza indiscriminately and kill women and children indiscriminately, knowing full well they do this. In other words, when the Israeli army bombs Gaza, they know there's no army in Gaza. They know there are no tanks in Gaza. They know they're going to kill civilians. And they know they're going to kill and burn children. Well, if this is the standard, then taking a few children and torturing them and scaring them, who cares? I think one of the, like I said, the prisoner situation and the fact that Israel holds so many political prisoners, including minors, including children, the only way to combat this is to expose Israel for what it is. Trying to solve this small issue or that small issue without dealing with the entire issue of this brutal racist regime, which is what Israel is not going to work because it is all part and parcel of the same thing. It is an ideology that is racist and is brutally violent. And the only way to move beyond that, if we don't like to see children hungry, and we don't like to see children being burnt by white phosphorus, and we don't like to see children being beaten and arrested by soldiers, we need to combat the whole basic idea of Zionism, which is a racist, colonialist, violent ideology. To try to solve one without the other, you can't. And the way you do this is you expose it. This has to be written in the major papers. This has to be an issue that newspapers and journalists and perhaps eventually politicians, but certainly people who consider themselves leaders, need to address. Again, this is not in some, underdeveloped country somewhere, God knows where. This is 3 hours flight from here. It is Israel. It's a developed country. It's what is considered a modern state. Yet all these abuses are taking place every single day, and only on Palestinians. In other words, Israelis are never subject to this sort of treatment. So the way to deal with it is to expose it, is to be there and to write about it and to talk about it and to talk to more people about it and not to be afraid to offend people, but to offend people. If people support the state of Israel, they deserve to be offended. They deserve to be confronted. And this is how you do this. You have to confront it head on, and you have to confront it as a whole, because that is what the state of Israel is about. There is no other state of Israel.
To find a way of helping those children. Yeah, but I understand that what you're saying, and I agree entirely, but it will take some time, and I'm desperate for those children.
Yeah.
No, that's it.
Are there people which agree with you in Israel?
There are many people who agree with me, but they're not Israelis. Most of them are not. Some Israelis do. There is a small, relatively small group of Israelis who are anti-Zionists, who support the Palestinian cause, who do, engage in solidarity actions with the Palestinians. But it's very small, and sadly, it's insignificant. The rest of the world, there are many people who support this idea. There are many people who support the anti-Zionist idea, the anti-Zionist campaign. There are many people who support BDS, the boycott, divestment, and sanctions. But it would be very strange, I think, if Israelis supported this. It'd be like the whites in South Africa didn't support apartheid, at the end of apartheid. They did not want to see apartheid fall. They did not want to see Nelson Mandela come out of jail. Well, Israeli Jews today, like myself, we are the whites in South Africa. This is the same society.
Yes, I must say that there were a lot of white people in South Africa who fought for the end of apartheid.
A lot, but not percentage-wise. Not
Okay.
a majority of
No,
whites.
no,
They were
sure.
a small minority. Of course, there were a lot, and it was important, but they were not a majority. And it's the same thing. You have Israelis who oppose Israel. But you know, it's interesting. Israel is a democracy for Jewish people. More so than white apartheid South Africa was for white people. In other words, in South Africa, if you were white and you opposed, and you were a member of the ANC, and you seriously opposed apartheid, you would have gone to jail. You know, those stories. You know, you were subject to some very serious harassment. This doesn't happen in Israel. Israelis sit quietly and allow this to happen. Israelis watch how the Israeli army bombs Gaza. Israelis go to watch how the Israeli army shoots to kill and abuse non-violent demonstrations by Palestinians. They do nothing.
What do you think about these young soldiers who don't want to serve for the army, the Israeli army now?
Yeah, these are the real heroes. Of course, they're very few, and these are the real heroes.
500.
Yeah, there are a little more than that. I mean, men and women that refuse to serve. And I think it's important to understand their particular situation. The Israeli army is very big, and only about half the people in Israel actually serve, because it's very easy to get out of the service. So if you have asthma, or you say you have a headache, or you say you can, you know, all kinds of, it's very easy to get out. Because the army is too big, and it really has no enemies, no serious... there are no security threats really to Israel. But so the army is too big. So they're quite happy to let people go if they're not interested. The only thing for which you will not be excused is if you say you are a conscientious objector.
They said that.
If you say, so these young people who say they're conscientious objectors go to jail. They could say they have migraine and they will be able to get out very easily. But they insist to say they have a moral issue and they go to jail. And they go in and out of jail for about a year, and quite often they are put in with hard criminals as punishment on top of punishment. And they do this anyway. So these are the real heroes. I wish to see many more of these, but of course I don't think it's realistic. And they are true heroes, and of course they do very important work, yes. Yeah.
Another question in the room.
Just to follow up on this issue with whole, you know, the Israeli society, and part of more than 500 actually refused to go to the army.
Last week there were 500
new ones, exactly.
Yeah.
And there's, you know, very important cases recently of young Palestinians from Israel who are Druze. And the Druze are c'est obligatoire to serve in the army. And 2 new cases of young people said that, no, we don't want to. We're Palestinians. We're part of the Palestinian people. We don't agree with the state of Israel, and we don't want to be part of the, you know, the army. So they refuse, and they have been put in jail. And there has been wide, you know, civil society movement speaking out against putting in jail not only Jewish Israelis, but also the Palestinians from Israel who refuse to serve in the army. So it's moving. But it's interesting because I was speaking to Miko Peled earlier in the car, and we were talking about the Israeli journalists and the Israeli mainstream and the mainstream media. And we see, you know, being a Palestinian from Israel, reading Hebrew newspapers almost on a daily basis, I see no coverage whatsoever of not only what's happening in, you know, in the West Bank and Gaza, but also of a discourse that, a very important discourse for someone like Miko Peled, an Israeli, Jewish, to speak about these issues. And I want to hear more. Maybe Miko, you can tell us, what do you think should be done now to change public opinion and to create a movement that can really spread the word, spread your word, speak about what you do, speak about your book, speak about your ideas. Maybe then a real influence should start from within the Israeli Jewish society.
Well, I think what needs to be done is being done. And I think there are big changes taking place, even in the United States, which is where I, you know, work mostly. there is the BDS movement, the movement that calls, which is a civil society organization, calls for the boycott, divestment, and sanctions against Israel. It's growing. It's becoming more and more important. And the way we know it's becoming more important is because both the Israeli lobby in the US and around the world and the Israeli government in Jerusalem are discussing this and are very worried and are spending millions of dollars to try to fight it. And they're not successful. So this is, I think, a good sign. And so I think the BDS offers a very good way to oppose Israel and to support justice in Palestine. You just don't buy Israeli products. If you go to the shelf and you see it's made in Israel, whether it's fruit, whether it's soda stream, whether it's whatever it may be, shampoo, they have all kinds of things that they make, Dead Sea, Hava, and so forth, you don't buy it. It's a very easy way to make your case, and of course it goes on beyond that. I mean, there's divestment taking place in Europe. There was some serious divestment from Bank Hapoalim and so on. So I think the BDS offers an excellent way for anybody to participate in this. There's a strong movement, and again, I speak mostly about what I see in the United States, but you see it in South Africa. I was there recently, and you see it in Europe, in European cities as well, on university campuses, where suddenly the Palestinian voice is being heard in a way that's unprecedented. You've got Palestine Awareness Week, you've got Israeli Apartheid Week. These are serious events taking place on campuses around the world. Major speakers are coming to participate, and they educate thousands of students. And the students that put this together, the pro-Palestinian student groups, are fighting a very difficult battle on many, many different fronts. They usually have to fight the administration. They usually have to fight the Israeli lobby. I mean, yet they hold divestment campaigns and divestment discussions on a regular basis. And you see it, you go from campus to campus to campus and you see this. And these young 20, 21, 22-year-old students are doing a remarkable job changing the level of conversation on this issue on campuses, which is very important. And again, when you see the weakness of the argument on the pro-Israeli groups, you can tell that there's huge progress because they have no argument to make. The best argument they come up with is anti-Semitism. It's anti-Semitism. Where is the anti-Semitism when so many Jewish people are supporting the pro-Palestinian campaigns? You know, what is anti-Semitic? But it's something they throw out there because they know it keeps people quiet. And then we take a look at, in Palestine itself, we take a look at the popular resistance movement in Palestine, something that began in 2005 in a small village of Bilain, and today spread like wildfire all over the West Bank. And you see countless of foreigners. You see Nobel laureates are there. You see major figures who are there to support them. You see how it grows from week to week, from month to month. You see the brutality with which these young Palestinians who are dedicated to the struggle for freedom, but also dedicated to nonviolence, you see them lead, you see them strategize, you see them develop this very strong movement, and you see the violence with which they are met by the Israeli army. You know, whenever I'm there, I always go to these protests. The violence, the shooting, the brutality with which these people who are dedicated to nonviolence and dedicated to justice are met by the Israeli army demonstrates the weakness of the Israeli argument, of the Israeli cause, because they have no argument to support or to legitimize what they do on the Israeli side. And I think, if you haven't seen or you haven't heard, I'm sure you have, Five Broken Cameras, which is an excellent movie. You know, this is a movie, a documentary that shows the story of one village, of one town, but exemplifies the strength and the moral strength of these young Palestinians who are out there fighting this good fight. And it almost won an Academy Award. I mean, it got that kind of recognition. This is unprecedented, this kind of recognition, and the world is realizing that there's a strong case to be made for the Palestinian cause. That if we talk about justice, then we have to support the Palestinian cause. There is no more room for balance. There is no more room for hearing the other side. The other side has made its case, and the other side speaks about a racist, brutal regime On the Palestinian side, we're talking about a conversation on justice. We're talking about a conversation about equal rights. We're talking about a conversation that includes a non-violent resistance, which is very successful. Now, all of these things are being done all the time, and I think they will continue. And I think the common denominator of all these three is that they will never surrender and they are undefeatable. In other words, it doesn't matter how much military force Israel has, these three aspects of the Palestinian resistance are undefeatable and will never surrender. This is a new form of very powerful and very moral resistance, which are unprecedented. So that is exactly what needs to happen, and it needs to happen more, and it is happening more, and it is growing. And when we spoke earlier, I mentioned to you that I am very optimistic in the next, maybe 7 to 10 years that there will be a major change in Palestine, and this is why. It's because this form of resistance is growing and is very successful, and I think is delivering on what they promised to do.
Do you think the Hamas and the Fatah would agree with your idea of one single state for everybody?
Well, the single state is not my idea. The single state began with the Fatah platform. This was the original Fatah platform. PLO platform was one of a single democracy. So it's not my idea. It precedes me by many, many decades.
But they changed their mind.
Well, the Palestinians were forced to change their platform from a single democracy to what is called a two-state solution, with the promise that this will bring them peace. And they did that in goodwill and in good faith, only to discover that the two-state solution is a code word for the destruction and surrender of Palestine. But officially, as a platform, both Fatah and the Hamas are committed to the two-state solution. But regardless of that, I'm sure some people think it's a good idea. Some people may oppose this idea. The reality is that today there is a single state over all of Palestine. It's an apartheid Zionist state that governs the lives of all people, like I described earlier, with different sets of laws for different parts of the population. We can continue to talk about other solutions if we want and allow this to continue. It's only going to strengthen Israel and make things worse for the Palestinians. Or we can talk about the ending or bringing about the end of the Zionist regime in place of a real democracy through nonviolent and democratic means to bring about a change, just like was done in South Africa, to bring an end to the Zionist racist regime and replace it with a real democracy, with one person, one vote. And of course, I think the second option is a better option for everyone. I think it'll be better for Israelis and better for Palestinians. Does everybody agree with it? Probably not. But we have a reality that we have to realize is there. We have 5.9 Israeli Jews and 6.1 Palestinians living under a regime that calls itself a Jewish state. Why is it Jewish? I don't know. Most Jewish people don't live there. Most of the people who do live there are not Jewish. Certainly the state of Israel is not characterized by Jewish values. Keeping thousands of political prisoners and denying children water because they're non-Jews is not Jewish values. So there's nothing Jewish inherently about the state of Israel. They do have state-appointed rabbis, which of course is non-Jewish too. So there's really nothing inherently Jewish about this state. But I would say that while people, again, may agree, some people may disagree, if we want to move towards a realistic resolution of this issue, we have to look at a concerted effort to bring about the end of Zionism and create a real democracy with one person, one vote.
Hello, sir. My name is Zori Mohammed. I'm for Press. I want just to ask a question about the wall. And the wall is idea from the Zionism idea or from the Israeli government?
The wall.
The wall.
Yes,
Who's have the idea to build the wall between?
Oh, the separation
yes.
wall was created by the Israeli government, of course. This was Ariel Sharon and some of his people. This was their idea in order to somehow create what they call fact on the ground.
And what do you think about, please?
About the
what
wall?
do you think about the wall?
Well, the wall is another complete waste of money, waste of effort, because all walls end up falling, and this one will fall just like the others. The wall, I think, in many ways represents Zionist thinking.
Right.
The wall was created just like the laws that govern the lives of Palestinians in order to make life for Palestinians harder, in order to make it harder for Palestinians to go to school, harder for them to go to work, harder for them to access their fields and cultivate their land. It is part of Zionist policies that have been around for, this is nothing new, since the creation of the State of Israel, to make life unlivable for Palestinians. And the wall is one more aspect. I think in many ways the wall is perhaps worse because it is a colossal waste of time and a colossal waste of money. When you think of all the good things that could have been done with these billions of dollars, But this is, I think, typical of racist, colonialist regimes. They're brutal, they're violent, and they're stupid. And they end up wasting money on things that are not going to work because the wall will not prevent, I think, the fall of Zionism.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Oui. Please.
Thank you for pressing the button. To come back to some pragmatic aspects of what you touched before, I forgot what I was going to say, so please go on to something else. And I'm going to come back to it, but I have complete blank.
Yeah, just to follow up on the wall, which is a very important point, it's also important to mention here that according to the Hague, court, in 2005, they issued that the wall by itself, it's not illegal, the idea. Each country can create their own borders. The route of the wall is completely illegal and it should stop because it's basically an enclave that is going deep inside Palestinian land and this is illegal. So the Hague issued that the route of the wall is illegal and it should stop and it should be diverted from the border into Israel. However, every time we go back to visit and every time Miko goes back to visit, the wall is expanding more and more and it's getting further deeper into Palestinian land. So even this is not being respected by the Israeli government. Yeah.
And of course, there's this myth that somehow the wall can stop terrorism or can stop the violence. There are two things the wall cannot stop. It cannot stop someone who's dedicated to commit an act of violence, and it cannot stop someone who's committed to reach out to the other side in peace. Because there's so many holes in the wall. If you drive around the wall, you see the access to the other side is actually very easy. Many of us who are activists and try and want to avoid the checkpoints, but do want to go to the other side in order to participate in solidarity actions and so forth, we circumvent the wall. It's very easy to circumvent the wall. So it's another one of these myths that somehow it's a security wall. There's a security aspect to it, but it's a lie, and it wouldn't do it even if somebody really tried. But once again, this is part of Zionist thinking, which is to make life unlivable for Palestinians, and in that regard, it's being very successful. If Palestinians, in many cases, and of course, in many cases, if it used to be a 10-minute drive to go to school or to go to work, now it's a 2 hours drive, or impossible completely, So again, we cannot take any one issue and solve it on its own because it's impossible to do. We can only resolve it with a concerted effort to end the regime and create something better in its place.
Do you think, sir, there is hope to end all this thing?
Yes, I'm convinced there's hope. If I didn't think there was hope, I wouldn't be doing this. There's no question in my mind. There's no question in my mind, and not only my mind, the mind of many people who are dealing with this issue, that the reality, regardless of the moral issue, regardless of the justice issue, the reality that exists today is unsustainable. And I can give you a few examples. If we look at Gaza again, no access to water fit for drinking, no access to basic medicine, no access to any kind of commerce or normal life, whereas this is 10 minutes away from major Israeli cities. You've got almost 2 million people living there. By 2020, according to a UN report that came out in 2012, by 2020, there will be an additional 500,000 people in Gaza alone. So we're going to have 2.1 or 2.2 million people living under siege. Now, they used to have access to tunnels. Now this new Egyptian regime closed those tunnels. And even the tunnels, where did they lead to? They didn't lead to Geneva, they led to Rafah, which in many cases sometimes is worse than the situation in Gaza. But still, they had some, 1,000, 1,500 tunnels, one of which I used about a year ago to go into Gaza, so it was very interesting. But now they don't even have those. So imagine in 5-6 years, 2.2 million people living in that small piece of land with no access to anything. I mean, it's absurd. It's an absurd proposition. Now, when the United Nations came out with this report in 2012, they did so because there was no plan on the Israeli side to deal with this. There were no reports. There are no statistics. There is no plan how to deal with this reality. You just keep the people there and hope that they disappear. They're not going to disappear. Quite the opposite. They're growing in numbers. And this is just one aspect. You look at Palestinian communities inside Israel, the citizens of Israel who are the non-Jews. Complete neglect. Complete neglect. Israeli police does not even go in to solve crime in these communities. And these are Israeli citizens. When Israeli citizens who are not Jews fly out of Tel Aviv airport, they consider Tel Aviv airport to be one of the most secure airports in the world. It's not secure. It's just plainly racist. When a citizen, whether they be a doctor, or maybe they be a family, or a politician, or a janitor, it doesn't make any difference. When they show up to Israeli airport, these are Israeli citizens. We're not talking about Hamas operatives. We're talking about plain Israeli citizens who happen to be Palestinians or non-Jews. At the turnoff from the highway, they're already stopped. And when the security officer determined their accent and determined that perhaps they came from a Palestinian community, they're stopped and they're investigated on the spot and held for maybe an hour. Then when they get to the terminal, they are identified by a code, by a number that's put on their suitcase, and they can be held for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 hours, and they have to catch a plane. Humiliated, strip searched, body searched. These are people with no criminal record. I mean, no reason. Sometimes people who have never had any political ties or anything at all. Only because they happen to have, because they're Palestinians. And then when it's all over, of course they open the suitcase right in the middle of the terminal, and every piece inside the suitcase has to be x-rayed. Because the x-ray that checks my suitcase and sees there are no bombs in it, of course the Palestinian suitcase must be different. So they need to open and take every shoe and every garment and x-ray it separately. Yeah. And then they take them by the hand like a criminal to their seat on the plane after everybody's seated. Because God forbid they might buy a cup of coffee or buy something in the duty free. We don't want Arabs doing this. So this is the reality. This is not sustainable. Besides being repugnant morally, it is not sustainable. And some of these people are Israeli doctors. Some of them are doctors that work in Israeli hospitals. Some of the finest doctors in Israeli hospitals are Palestinians. Yet they face this reality. They face these racist laws. This is completely, besides being unjustifiable and inexcusable, unsustainable. And of course, we haven't even talked about the West Bank in the reality there. So besides being morally wrong, this is a reality that is not sustainable. This cannot continue. The world is waking up. More and more, of course, not mainstream media, but underground media, online publications that are very good and reliable are talking about this issue. Like I said, churches and universities and so forth are becoming involved in this issue. So this is not sustainable. And I don't see, and it's not only me. I mean, there are a host of people who are active on this issue, like I am. I don't think this can go on for more than maybe 7 or 10 years. And I think then people will say, "Oh, why did it take so long?" But this is 10 years too many. But I think this is the scope. I think Israel cannot continue to fight this fight for any much longer than that. Yeah.
I hope so.
Yeah, inshallah.
What do you think about the last events? Do you think these very religious people attacking Muslims and the Christians' place of churches will help for an evolution of the minds.
I don't think they're going to help anybody, anytime, anywhere. I don't
No,
think
but
there's
the
anything
people are
helpful.
very shocked.
I don't think anybody's shocked.
Yes,
Inside
people
Israel.
in the world are very shocked.
In the world, perhaps, but not in Israel. I think there's nothing surprising. I think Israel, there's a new relatively new phenomenon in Israel, which is these very religious Jews who, typically the Orthodox Jewish community was anti-Zionist or non-Zionist. But this is a new kind of breed, a very toxic combination of Orthodox Judaism and nationalism.
Both of them? I mean,
It's a combination of the two. It's a combination of the two. It's a very toxic combination of these two, which created these Jewish terrorists. This is what they are, and they make up. They have a lot of funding, interestingly enough, from the United States, and they have a free reign in the West Bank, particularly in the southern part of the West Bank, in Hebron and the South Hebron Hills. They create havoc. I mean, they do terrible things all the time. From time to time, they do something that captures the press. But if you would see what they do in Hebron and what they do in parts of the West Bank, you would be shocked every single day. Not only when they happen to, destroy a mosque or or a church, which of course is terrible. They sometimes come out, but they are establishing a presence in Jaffa, which is inside Israel, in the Palestinian community, and terrorizing Palestinians in Jaffa itself, in the Galilee. And they're establishing a presence. Of course, they have a very strong presence in the West Bank. And what's interesting that many times their communities in the West Bank are called illegal outposts, which is interesting because when you visit these illegal outposts, they have roads, they have electricity, they have running water, they're connected to the state, and they have the Israeli army guarding these outposts. So if they are illegal, why are they getting all the support from the state? But there they are, and of course this is at the expense of Palestinians and their freedom and their rights. And then they walk around and they terrorize the Palestinians all over their communities. This is not being reported on a regular basis, though this happens on a regular basis. There's nothing unique about these particular cases, other than for some reason somebody decided to report on them. But if you talk to Palestinians who live under the gun of these settlers, of these very, very dangerous terrorists, I think, Jewish terrorists, they will tell you horrifying stories every single day. And there are groups of churches and there are groups of Israelis who go just to protect them on a regular basis. There's Ta'ayush, which is an Israeli group that goes to protect them, particularly in the South Hebron Hills. You've got the ecumenical accompaniment program, which are organized by churches that go again and just to protect Palestinian children and their way to school from the settlers who harass them and so forth. So again, this is how reality. This is part and parcel of what it means to have the state of Israel there. And again, this is happening every single day.
Vous avez un micro?
Please.
Yes, please. Could you please push
There's no
on the...
microphone.
Okay. Thank you, sir, for this lecture. All this, what you explained just now, horrified things and image and acts against Palestinians. I want to ask you why. Why, when you are victorious, so strong country, why do you need a victim to suffer in front of you? Why those Israelis, they want those Palestinians to be humiliated, to suffer in front of them, their eyes, in front of the eyes of the world? Why do you need, when you are victorious, those victimized or victim people in front of you, daily suffering? Why do you think it's happening every day? You know, usually you need to hide those things. You don't show them to the world, you know? You don't show these things. You hide them, you deny them. So why the Israeli so proud or so needy to see the suffering of the other? Can you really think with me? Because I'm looking for this answer for a long time now, and I couldn't really find any logic answer. Thank you, sir.
Well, there's nothing unique about Israel. All colonialist, settler, racist societies are brutal. You know, look at what the Belgians did in Congo. Look at what the white people did to the Native Americans. I mean, there's nothing. Regimes that are racists and colonialists always do the same thing. They want to wipe out the people who are there, and that's exactly what they're doing. Now, in this case, there's an added aspect because the Zionists claim that the entire country belongs to the Jews, all the Jews around the world. And the Palestinians are there just transient. So we need to get rid of them because this is our land. It's not even their land. It all goes back to, again, to this very racist, colonialist ideology, which is what Zionism is. So the way to get rid of them is to make life impossible for them. And then blame them and say that we have a security threat. It's quite funny, not funny in a funny way, funny in a sick way. During Operation Cast Lead, after days and days of bombing, hundreds of tons of bombs from the air, Israel brought 10,000 soldiers, the ground troops, 10,000 troops to go into Gaza. Gaza has never had a tank. Gaza has never had an F-16 plane. There's never been a Palestinian army. Why do we need 10,000 troops to invade Gaza? Gaza is under Israeli control. Why? To create the impression that there's something very dangerous there. Hamas is there. Before it was Hamas, it was something else. Israel has been doing this in Gaza for a very long time and has been harassing and beating Palestinians since Israel was established. This is the nature of racist colonialist regimes. They are brutally violent. It's the only way they can maintain themselves. Because there is no legitimacy to Israel. There is no legitimacy at all to Zionism. So they claim all this nonsense that it's the land of the Jews, and then they claim that there's a security threat, and they give themselves all kinds of reasons to do what they want to do, which is to get rid of the native population. Mm-hmm. So that's how they do it. So it actually makes a lot of sense, and they're not that much different than other colonialist settler regimes and ideologies around the world. This is exactly what they do, and they've done this in other places around the world, and this is just one more example.
I'm sorry, sir. I'm really not satisfied with this answer because I know already that colonialism and settlement, in England, in India, and Spain in America, Belgium in Congo, all that. I know that. But Israel, they came to stay.
Yes.
Sure. They came to stay, and they are there for 70 years almost. Yeah. It's not logic. I'm really thinking about really why do you need for 70 years to harm the other, although you are you there to stay, not just to to suck the country from its water or land or whatever. No, to suck the whole country. You are there to suck everything, to swallow everything, and you are there. And you are glorious, you are victorious, you have everything. You have the support of the world anyway. But why do you need, as settlers to go to a Palestinian peasant, and to tell him, if you behave good, I will use you as a slave? Why do you need that? From where those Israelis, they brought this mentality, this brutality? How come they can be so Nazi? How? I don't understand that. I'm really not satisfied. I need everybody to look in this question. Why? Why they are brutal? Why they need to be brutal? Why they need to be absolutely absurd even? It's absurdity. You are strong, you have arms, you have everything, you are rich, you have the support of the West who created you. So why?
I'll tell you what I said before. It's a racist, brutal ideology. That is what drives Israel. How else will they get rid of the people who live there? How else will they get rid of the Palestinians? They want to get rid of the Palestinians. So you do it by being brutal.
Red, you mean abolish them, kill them all, burn them all? They did in Germany against the Jews.
This is
What they want to do.
This is what Zionism is. It's a racist ideology. Yes.
So to be burned.
I don't know. You don't ask me. I'm not representing them. I'm telling you, this is a reality that exists, and it's going to continue. That's why we have to get rid of Zionism.
So what to do? In front of
Oh well, you missed the first half of my
Yes, she was not
presentation.
here, yeah.
If you read my book, you'll see.
I hope so.
Is there any? Yes, please come and use the.
It's all right. I can speak.
No, we don't hear you in the video.
It's okay. I will speak loudly. I have been listening to your very moving statement and sympathize with all what you've said as far as the Palestinian people are concerned. I have been privileged to work on the problem with the intention of finding a solution suitable for the strangers who came to Palestine, that is the Jews or the Israelis, and the natives of that land called Palestine. I have contributed a great deal to this effect following the Oslo meeting in 1993, and all of a sudden the entire movement went out of control, and nobody paid attention to the plight of the Palestinian people. Millions have been scattered in the Middle East, and some of them went to Australia, to Canada, to the United States to find a living. What I would like to ask you, Mr. Peled, is, it brings me to the question of the peace process. And as you know very well, the peace process has been going on for decades now. And are the positions of the parties involved, the two parties, reconcilable or not reconcilable at all? Judging by the results of this peace process that has been going on, the results have shown to me, as a student of the Middle East, that the results are not reconcilable until and unless there is a political solution. And in bringing the political solution, Israel is not the only party there to bring a political solution. West Europe is involved because of historical reasons. America is involved because of political maneuvering and lobbying that you know. And the rest of the world have shrugged their shoulders from time to time and giving lip service to the Palestinians. But in your view, as a very, very valid arguments that you have put across, do you think that the peace process is dead for sure and there is no solution to the problem between these two parties concerned, the Jews or Israelis and Palestinians? I would like your views on that in order for myself to find a way in my own mind. I'm not writing anything nowadays. In my own mind, I would like to see that there is light at the end of the tunnel that we have been going through 60 years.
Well, I talked about this at the beginning of my comments. I think you missed it. I think there's several problems with the peace process, but one major one is that nobody represents the Palestinians in the peace process. Number one. Number two, the peace process that began with Oslo was never intended to bring peace. It was intended to bring the Palestinians to surrender, which is why it's failing. So I wouldn't say that the conflict is there's no room for reconciliation. There is. It's not within the context of the peace process, because the peace process is designed very successfully to make the Palestinians weaker and make Israel stronger. And that's what has happened over the last 2 decades since the Oslo process began. So I think in many ways people say Oslo failed. I think Oslo was a spectacular success, because it succeeded to do exactly what it was designed to do: weaken the Palestinians and strengthen Israel. If we want to talk about reconciliation, if we want to talk about resolving the conflict, we have to look within the context of South Africa. We have to bring down the racist regime of Zionism, just like there had to be brought down the racist regime of apartheid, and allow for a one person, one vote political structure where there is a real democracy and Israelis and Palestinians live as equals. That is the only context in which you can see a solution to this conflict. That is the only context. Now, I will say, like I said earlier, the reason for I do have some optimism is because I think more and more people are realizing this. I talked earlier about the different forms of resistance. All of these forms of resistance recognize today that this whole notion of a two-state solution is nonsense, and that the only solution is within the context of a real democracy for Israelis and Palestinians, because it's already one state. It's just that the form of government is flawed, is racist. And so in that context, there is hope. In the context of the peace process, of course, there is no hope, because it's not meant to bring about a solution.
Merci beaucoup. On peut continuer la discussion. We can go on with this discussion, having drinks. Thank you very much to have come. And thank you very much, Miko Peled. It was very interesting.
Thank you. Merci.